Welcome to our second session looking at the infancy narratives. Today we're going to be looking at part of what St. Luke is about. If two of the four Gospels, Mark and John, have no infancy narrative at all, Matthew gives us some really interesting material, a genealogy, Joseph and dreams, the idea of who is the true king, of Gentiles coming and worship. Then Luke gives us even more stuff. And for most people, it's Luke's narrative, which is the Christmas story. On first looking at them, you could think that these two birth narratives are very, very different. There's all the stuff about John the Baptist. There are these poems or songs. The stories start in very different places, Nazareth and Bethlehem. Joseph is the main character rather than Mary in Matthew. And then who visits? Shepherds or magi? These are very different or even contradictory. But there are important things in common. Both have Herod the king as the monarch of the time. There are always Joseph, who doesn't get much mention in the New Testament as Joseph, and Mary, of course. There's a virgin becoming pregnant. There's giving the child the name Jesus. And there is the location of Bethlehem. I assume that Luke had read Matthew and probably had a copy in front of him. He may well have wanted to make some very different points. Because if Matthew is the gospel of Jewish law, Luke has a very different emphasis. He's writing to a Greek-speaking Gentile community, and he has women and the poor as its focus. After all, you've got the Annunciation is to Mary, quite spectacularly, who then goes to see her cousin Elizabeth. The men are rather on the fringe. The shepherds in Luke replace the magi. Herdsmen in the first century in Judaism were considered at best dishonest. They were not good Jews. They were thieves. They were really outcasts. And in the Greek milieu where Luke is writing, herdsmen are often seen as the people who are visited by gods. And of course, Luke, writing for a Greek readership, is trying to say different things from Matthew. He has a sense that the poor and the outsiders are the people who matter. He was probably writing from a mainly Gentile church, so there is no need for Gentile magi to come along. What he is concerned about is the insignificant in society, the humble and meek. Humble and meek. Well, that's a phrase that comes to us from the Magnificat. One of the oddities of scholarship looking at these chapters is how scholars nearly always refer to the canticles or songs, Benedictus, the Magnificat, the Nunc Dimittis, and the Glory to God in the highest. They talk about them as songs. Certainly these passages are poetry, but I don't see why they have to be thought of as songs, because the text clearly says said. But anyway, that's what people like, and like the stable, it's come to stay. The two birth stories in St. Luke's Gospel run in parallel. There's the birth of John the Baptist and the birth of his cousin Jesus. We don't have this relationship in the other Gospels. The first believers had an issue about the relationship between John and Jesus. John was a very, very significant character in first century Judaism. By the time that St. John's Gospel was written after Luke, very probably, he has to make it very clear that John is not anywhere near as important as Jesus. I am not the Christ, he has to say. But the Synoptic Gospels, and that means Luke here, see him very much as related to Jesus as a forerunner. When we look at Luke, it's worth reminding us that there is no inn and there is no innkeeper, sheep or goats. What Luke actually writes, he says there was nowhere for Jesus to be put down in the kataluma. Kataluma is a word that can mean dwelling, it could mean an inn, but where Luke wants to have an inn, he uses a different word altogether. In the story of the Good Samaritan, he uses a different word. It is specifically an inn. Here, kataluma simply means a place to stay. If you think of the usual Nativity play, there's usually this urgency. Joseph knocks on the door and tells the innkeeper, "My wife is about to have a baby." There's none of that in this text. So we have got a place in which they are living while Jesus is born. It was cramped. And so they go to a bit of the house where the animals were fed. Houses, of course, often had sections within the house in which animals would feed or even stay in the worst weather. There might be a stone trough in the wall, and that was quite normal. The word for manger can also mean a stall for the animal, not just the eating trough. The idea seems to be then that the place was packed. There was nowhere to put the baby, so they put him in where the animals are. But this could have been a house. It's not necessary that it has to be out in the open air or out in an outhouse. A few things to think about. And one question that I'd like to ask you twice. Luke emphasizes that Jesus was in swaddling bands and lying in the manger. He says it himself, and then the angels say this to the shepherds. He emphasizes the swaddling bands and the manger. If any of you can say why he repeats this as something important, please let's hear. See you on Wednesday.